Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at the headlines. All but 2 of the 181 passengers have died after a crash landing in South Korea. The reason for the Jeju airplane crash is yet to be determined. The reports of a bird strike and landing gear failures have circulated. Israeli forces have reportedly detained 240 people after raiding the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza, claiming it was being used as a Hamas command centre. These claims have been dismissed as a lie by Hamas. President-elect Donald Trump has backed Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk in a row over H-1B visa scheme. MAGA supporters and Republicans have been debating the scheme amid anti-immigration pledges from the incoming president. Protests have continued in Georgia as Mikhail Kevalashvili has been sworn in as president. The former footballer's appointment comes as the outgoing president refuses to leave post amid election fraud allegations. A tragic plane crash in Muan City, South Korea has claimed the lives of at least 179 people. Jeju Air Flight 7C2216 en route from Bangkok veered off the runway and collided with a fence as it attempted to land on Sunday morning. Of the 175 passengers and 6 crew members aboard, the youngest victim was just 3 years old and the oldest was 78. Reports suggest a bird strike may have contributed to the crash, with one survivor confirming the crew issued a mayday call before impact. As the plane was engulfed in flames, local TV stations broadcasted haunting images of thick black smoke. The flight data recorded and the 2 black boxes have been recovered so far. Messages of condolences have poured in from around the world, with condolences from both US and German ambassadors. Acting President Choi Sang-mok has declared Muan a special disaster zone to aid recovery efforts for grieving families. We're first joined by our correspondent Aditya Wadwan. Aditya, this is another horrific plane crash. We've had 2 within a week, but the death toll is a lot higher. In terms of the reaction to this from across the world, but also in Korea, what have you been seeing?
Well, absolutely, Josh. It's a very unfortunate incident that has happened. Earlier this plane crash in Kazakhstan has happened, and now this has happened. I mean, when this plane was in the air, the South Korean Transport Ministry had issued a warning that the bird had hit the plane, and but the pilot, I think the pilot couldn't pay attention to it. Also, the local TV channels in South Korea were airing the video. Were playing the videos that show that the landing gear wasn't deployed when the plane was being landed. This has actually, it is a very also a very this was also on the pilot could have paid more attention to it, but this was he couldn't. Earlier we have also in the past known that the Boeing aircrafts are known to be problematic. In May this year, what happened? Singapore Airlines Boeing aircraft that was operating between London and Singapore went through a severe turbulence mid-air that resulted in one passenger's death. In another incident, what happened was an American airline a plane which had a Boeing aircraft was taking off, and the doors had remained open. So there have been concerns about the safety of passengers when it comes to Boeing aircraft. I think what this certainly needs to be probed as to what is wrong with the Boeing aircraft, or are they not making advanced aircraft so that the passenger safety can be ensured. In addition to this, Josh, let us remind our viewers that International Airport Transport Association should now step in and ensure the standard protocols in case of such emergencies, which is critical for saving human lives. It needs to be seen. Another incident where an Air Canada plane and had landed, had done a very unsafe landing. That was another issue. But hopefully there weren't any casualties in that incident. but this needs to be seen. We can also
Aditya,
put
thank
this
you
into
very much
perspective.
for joining us there. We're going to be joined now by two guests. We have Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, former spokesperson on Ministry of Defence, and we have Dr. Satoru Nagao, who's a fellow at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Nagao, I'd like to come to you first. The reaction that we've seen in terms of the support and the condolences from across the world really emphasises how horrific this crash is. In terms of the reaction that you're seeing, can you fill us in on sort of what the feeling is? And we now know, of course, there are going to be 7 days of mourning in Korea, so it really is a tragic accident.
No, that this is tragic, but at the same time, we need to check what happened exactly. But when we check this cause, of course, one report indicates that bird strike is cause of the problem. But bird strike affects the engine, not related to flap or aircraft wheel. So when we check the video of the landing, there is no aircraft wheel, and the speed is too high. This means that flap is not working. So that's why this is a completely different problem. Flap and aircraft wheel related to electronic system or oil pressure system, this is not directly linked with the bird strike. So that's why what really happened, we need to know. One of the problem, if the bird strike is the main problem, this is a problem related to the airport side. This is directly linked with the governmental side. But if the airplane itself is a problem, this is a maintenance problem or the maker's problem. So that's why what is the real problem of this incident is a very important aspect to affect the political situation in South Korea, I think. Thank you.
Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, as somebody who knows all about planes and is more of an expert on this, from the images of what you've seen, what do you think has gone wrong here? Are birds going to have such an impact that would lead to this sort of crash? And what investigations do you think now need to be carried out, considering the vast loss of life that's been suffered?
Mr. Joshua, besides being spokesperson, I was also, but I'm a fighter pilot and an accident investigator, officially. The bird strike, I would like to just add here, can lead to any emergency, not only ingestion. It all depends on which place it has struck and how big the bird was. If the bird is heavy, it can go through the air fuselage and hit the hydraulic system. There is no doubt. So it can happen that bird strike can enter the cockpit and kill the pilot. And if bird hits the engine ceases. So there can be so many things. And it all depends on what was the weight of the bird, how many birds were there. Probably aircraft could have flown through a flock of birds. That is one thing. But question arises that this aircraft had an emergency, that is, the undercarriage was not coming down. The undercarriage were half down, very little, and the aircraft, when it touched down, it touched practically on its belly, and after some time the undercarriage buckled more, and it was quite nicely on its belly, the friction of the airframe causing heat. Now, one thing you must understand, in this emergency, there are no brakes available to the pilot because the undercarriages are up, so he can apply no brakes. And then he must have switched off his engine. That's right. He did a right thing if he had done that. But the aircraft kept rolling and then went off the runway and hit a wall. If aircraft previously, the airliners used to have tail parachute. Let me tell you one thing, not only fighters, but even the airliners had. Caravel, I've seen deploying chute when I was flying in it as a passenger. So they are there. But due to economic constraints, etc., airliners have done away with it. In my previous, one of my investigations in the Mangalore air crash, I had recommended that the parachute, tail parachute, or dangerous runways must be included. Then some airline are introducing the crash barrier system. The crash barrier system is very important. Fighter aircraft use it. It is a big volleyball sort of a net, and aircraft goes into it. if there was a crash barrier here and also in the tabletop Bangalore crash, lot of lives could have been saved. This is one aspect. Because of paucity of funds, we take shortcuts. Now, inquiry is going to be there, cockpit voice recorder, flight data recorder, inputs will come. You don't know exactly what actually happened. Yes, engine could have been on fire, and engine was on fire. The pilot had to put the engine off, and then he's coming into land with undercarriage up. There is no reason why he should keep his throttles on. So as he rounded off, touchdown, he put his both the throttles back and the engine was off. That is the correct thing he did. But I personally feel that these lives could have been saved, and we have more investigation have to be done. Of course, within our discussions, we are talking in terms of Boeing and Airbus, etc. Yes, Boeing has been facing a lot of problems. There's no doubt about it. I have done some inquiries with Boeing also. They do come with the problem because the reasons are quite different. We won't discuss them here. But this, suffices to say that this crash had to happen because if undercarriage is not coming down, then any aircraft will meet this situation. Because
Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, thank you very much for joining us. We will continue, of course, to bring you the latest updates from South Korea. Also, thank you to Dr. Satoru Nagao. We now move on to a story coming from the Middle East, where the Health Ministry in Gaza has reported that over 240 Palestinians, including dozens of medical staff, have been detained by Israeli forces, with some detainees coming from the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza. Among those detained is the hospital's director, Hassam Abu Safia, prompting significant concern for the ministry regarding his health. Several staff members released by Israeli forces have claimed that Abu Safia was beaten by soldiers during the detainment. The Israeli Defense Forces have justified the operation, labelling the hospital as a Hamas command centre and stating that the detention was part of border efforts targeting Hamas infrastructure. However, Hamas has strongly rejected Israel's assertions, stating that no fighters were present within the hospital at the time of detentions. While Hamas has denied the claims, the group has refrained from commenting on the arrest of the 240 individuals. Aditya Wadwan, we are going to you again. In terms of the ongoing conflict, we've seen a lot of fighting, we've seen a lot of death, but in terms of the sheer volume of people being apprehended, 240 in what's being described by IDF forces as a Hamas command centre. This is somewhat unprecedented to what we've seen over recent weeks, but could you provide us a bit more context to the actual incident in terms of how this happened?
Well, Joshua, as you rightly pointed out, that Israeli Defense Forces have been saying that this particular Kamal Adwan hospital is being operated by Hamas militants to carry out attacks. This has been for quite some time. They have been targeting this hospital as they believe that covertly these Hamas officials have been operating from there. And to answer in this context, if we talk about Josh, let us just into perspective for our viewers. Some patients who were there in the Kamal Adwan hospital have claimed that despite having a lot of injuries, they were beaten by the Israeli soldiers.
Aditya Wadwan, thank you very much. We will now move to Raymond Vickery, who is the former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Raymond Vickery, thank you so much for joining us today. Looking at this incident, is this a further escalation that we're seeing in the Middle East, or is this a continuation of action that has been happening across recent months?
Well, thanks for having me, Joshua. I think that this is yet another illustration of the inhumanity of modern warfare and shows the need for Israel to be able to look forward as to what is going to happen in the Middle East after the conflict is decided. It cannot be the case that you're going to have perpetual incidents of this kind, which involve innocent people, that prohibit the giving of medical care in a timely fashion. That having been said, it is certainly the case that Hamas has used and will continue to use shields, human shields, to be able to protect their operatives in this area. So what has to happen here is a ceasefire and a look at the way in which peoples can live together in the Middle East, and that seems to be really out the window at this time. And it is incumbent upon great democracies like India, the United States, and others not to just disengage and say, well, whatever happens out there happens, but to try to bring some semblance of peace and normality to this area.
Raymond, coming back to you, in terms of the sort of differing reports that we're having from both sides, the IDF claiming that the people that were apprehended were Hamas operatives, the health ministry in Gaza saying that not all of them were, if any. How do you get to a point where both sides can agree, and it's a continuation of a theme we're seeing? You mentioned a ceasefire there. There's so much divisiveness between what's being reported on either side. How can we get any closer, or how can the region get any closer to some form of ceasefire when these incidents are continuing?
Well, the only way you get to a ceasefire is by outside pressure. The United States has a role to play here because we're the ones that are providing arms to Israel. The United Nations has a role to play because it is the only incident that is providing any kind of humanitarian relief. India has a role to play. The point is, you can't just walk away from this kind of conflict and expect that it is going to be resolved, because there's always the question of what happens the day after. And it's impossible to believe that you can just wipe out a populace, or you can have these kinds of things going on and then expect any kind of semblance of peace and normality going forward. So you can't just leave it to the combatants to be able to do that, and the international community has to pull together in order to be able to push this forward. And those like India who deal with Israel and the United States have a special role to play.
We're also joined by Jordan Cope, who is a Middle Eastern expert. Jordan, I'd like to come with you back to you in terms of the humanitarian situation. We know that the Kamal Adwan Hospital was one of the last operating hospitals within northern Gaza, if not the last. What impact will this have on the people living in northern Gaza and the continued humanitarian crisis that is happening in the region?
I would just like to disagree respectfully with some of the analysis so far. To wipe out a population was a claim that was made. Gaza's population has actually grown. And even though that hospitals generally have protected status under international law, if they are being used for military purposes, military objectives, they lose that civilian protected status. And I would like to mention that throughout Gaza, many of the hospitals are not only being used for terror purposes, but are actually named after terrorists themselves. The Kamal Adwan Hospital was named after Kamal Adwan, who was a member of the Black September movement. Another hospital, the Rantisi Hospital, was named after a co-founder of Hamas. Hostages have literally been stored in these hospitals at times, and it's important to note that if we want a ceasefire to come about in Gaza, it is essential that Hamas releases the 101 hostages currently under its detainment. Regarding the humanitarian situation in Gaza, Israel has allowed an unprecedented 1 million tons of aid approximately into the Gaza Strip. Their aid efforts and their distribution have often been interrupted because of negligence on behalf of the UN and the authorities within the Gaza Strip. Israel is not obligated to actually provide all of these humanitarian resources, knowing that at oftentimes it will be siphoned by Hamas authorities, especially in Rafah at one point in the south, where Hamas was siphoning an estimated 60 to 80%. So Israel is certainly doing what it can to allow aid to come into the country at its own will, at its own voluntary will. The Kamal Adwan Hospital operation is nothing exceptional. Israel previously had an operation in the Ashifa Hospital in which 200 Hamas military operatives who were identified were killed, 500 were detained, and many of those detained were released, such as Al Jazeera's Ismail El-Ghul, who was later found out to be a Hamas member himself. So Israel, in terms of how it has conducted itself, has exceeded expectations in modern day warfare. And if you look at Lebanon to compare to how Israel has conducted itself throughout the Middle East, you'll get a clearer picture as to how Israel has abided by international law, how Israel has tried to spare humanitarians, because Hamas simply lies. The health ministry in Gaza is a lie. It is a Hamas-run institution by a US-designated terrorist organization. In Lebanon, approximately 2,000 out of those 3,000 killed have been identified as Hezbollah operatives. That is a better case study for us to understand how Israel has conducted itself. And in modern-day warfare, according to the United Nations, 87% of all casualties in modern-day warfare, unfortunately, are civilian. It is an excessively high number, but the reality is that Israel is completely outperforming democracies in how they've conducted their own warfare. And we should be reminded that the United States, my beloved country, of which I'm a proud patriot, did attack hospitals in Afghanistan. So to demonize Israel by trying to make this seem as something exceptional is unfortunately a false analysis. And it should be noted that there is footage of Israeli hostages at times having been moved to the Al-Shifa hospital, which was a command center for Hamas at one point. The Kamal Adwan Center, the former director, I guess now, Ahmed Khalot, was previously a lieutenant commander for Hamas, who admitted that there are multiple members of his staff, not just in Hamas, but in their military brigades. So it's very important to assess Israel's actions relatively, respectfully, and to give it understanding, and importantly, to provide context. Hamas thrives off of misinformation surrounding hospital operations. Hospitals are a very sensitive place, as are medical centers. Hezbollah in the north in Lebanon actually has a lot of health welfare apparatus programs to recruit support. But going back to Hamas, Hamas knows that they can demonize Israel by making it seem that they're attacking civilian infrastructure. And so never forget the Al Ahli hospital lie in the beginning of the war, where a Palestinian Islamic Jihad misfire hit the hospital, and Hamas claimed that Israel had killed about 300 to 500 people at the time. It was later found to be false misinformation, which Hamas thrives on. Israel was scapegoated by major international media outlets, and it was all proven to be a lie. And unfortunately, these type of lies are fueled by what is modern-day anti-Semitism. Instead of attacking the Jew, nowadays people attack the Jewish state with blood libels and misinformation. So it's important to heed carefully when analyzing these type of operations, to give time, to give context, and to use the past as a roadmap for how Israel is and has conducted itself.
Jordan Cope, thank you very much for providing us with the information there. Raymond Vickery as well, thank you very much. We now move on to Russia's Gazprom, which has announced it will stop gas exports to Moldova starting on January the 1st, citing unpaid debts. Moldova, with a population of 2.5 million, plans to reduce energy consumption by 1/3. Transnistria also faces energy disruptions, while Moldova seeks alternative gas sources.
On Saturday, Russian energy giant Gazprom announced that it would suspend gas exports to Moldova from January 1st, citing failure in regular payments under the existing contract as the reason. Gazprom supplies gas to the Kashyrgan power plant, which produces electricity powering a substantial part of Moldova. The company reserves the right to terminate its supply contract with Moldova. In an ex-post, Moldovan Prime Minister Doran Rachin condemned the Russian decision, calling this a deliberately induced security crisis. He also dismissed the invalidated debt claims made by Moscow. Rachin said Moldova had diversified sources of gas supply in order to reduce dependence on a single supplier. This declaration did not come as a surprise to the Moldova capital, Chisinau. Moldova and Transnistria have both declared states of emergency over the threat of disrupted gas supplies. Moldova, with a population of 2.5 million, is implementing measures to reduce energy consumption by 1/3 starting January 1st. Transnistria's government announced that gas supplies to non-essential businesses would be cut off starting Saturday, but households will continue receiving gas, heating, and hot water until January 1st. Once the current transit deal with Ukraine expires on December 31st, Russian gas exports through Ukraine to Slovakia, Austria, Hungary, and Italy will completely end. Moldovan President Maia Sandu too accused Gazprom of fueling an energy crisis by refusing to deliver gas via an alternative route. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Here are the latest updates from the world of business. The Third US Circuit Court of Appeals on Friday rejected Starbucks' appeal of National Labour Relations Board ruling. The court backed the NLRB's findings that Starbucks illegally fired two Philadelphia baristas, Echo Nowacka and Tristan Boursier, for trying to unionise. The court ruled that there was enough evidence to support the claim and rejected Starbucks' argument against rehiring them with back pay. Chinese-linked hackers from the Salt Typhoon Group targeted AT&T and Verizon, but both companies have secured their US networks. AT&T said it found a small number of compromised individuals of foreign interest and is working with authorities to protect data. Verizon confirmed it contained the attack and detected no ongoing threats. Both companies are continuing their investigations and cooperation with law enforcement. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, the Chancellor and the Business Secretary have asked UK regulators, including Ofgem and Ofwat, to suggest reforms that could help boost economic growth. This follows recent data showing the UK economy stagnated between July and September. Shadow Business Secretary Andrew Griffith criticised the request, blaming Labour's budget for hindering growth. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned that the US could hit its debt limit as early as January 14, 2025, potentially requiring extraordinary measures to avoid default. Yellen urged Congress to act promptly to protect the nation's credit. Under a 2023 budget deal, the debt ceiling was suspended until January 1, 2025, but action will be needed soon after. OpenAI has announced plans to restructure by creating a public benefit corporation to raise more capital and remove restrictions imposed by its non-profit parent. The move aims to balance profit-making with societal interests as OpenAI seeks investment to advance artificial general intelligence. The shift follows a debate on the fairness of asset allocation and public benefit. Duke Energy has filed a plan with the Florida Public Service Commission to recover $1.1 billion in costs from its response to Hurricanes Debby, Helene and Milton. The hurricanes caused extensive damage. This included downed power lines, leaving thousands without electricity. Residential customers' bills will rise by approximately $21 per 1,000 kilowatt hours starting from March 2025, with costs remaining until February the year after. Mikhail Kavelashvili was inaugurated as Georgia's president despite his election being called illegitimate by the opposition. His swearing-in comes amid protests in Tbilisi, where over 2,000 people formed a human chain to oppose delays in EU integration talks. Here are the latest updates from across Georgia.
Governing Georgian Dream Party loyalist Mikhail Kavelashvili has been inaugurated as president, despite the election which brought him to power being declared illegitimate by the outgoing leader and opposition. His swearing-in comes at a crucial time for the country, after the government suspended its application to join the European Union. Before the inauguration, thousands of Georgians gathered in Tbilisi to protest Kavelashvili. Over 2,000 people formed a human chain in Tbilisi, marking a month of protests against the Georgian Dream administration's delay in EU integration talks. The protests have resulted in hundreds of arrests and accusations of torture.
ხვალ რაც არ უნდა მოხდეს და ვინც არ უნდა დაუკრას ტაში ყაველაშვილს საქართველოსთვის ის პრეზიდენტი ვერასოდეს ვერ იქნება ისევე როგორც ქართული ოცნება ვერ იქნება ვერასოდეს მართველი ძალა იმიტომ რომ ისინი არიან არალეგიტიმური ხელისუფლება ამ ეტაპზე და ჩვენ ვითხოვთ.
Outgoing President Salamir Zurabishvili, who has been a prominent figure in Georgia's pro-European Union movement, refused to step down on Sunday. She addressed the crowd outside, stating the following:
მე აქედან გამოვალ თქვენთან გამოვალ და თქვენთან ერთად ვიქნები. მე ჩემთან ერთად მიმაქვს ლეგიტიმურობა. ჩემთან ერთად მიმაქვს დროშა. ჩემთან ერთად მიმაქვს ის რაც არის თქვენი ნდობა.
Zurabishvili criticized the electoral process, denouncing Kavelashvili's election as a travesty. as he was the sole candidate under an electoral college system. Georgia's 4 main opposition parties have rejected Kevalashvili and are boycotting parliament. Pro-EU protests have continued, with demonstrators calling for new parliamentary elections. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's stay in Europe for the latest news updates from across that continent. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev accused Russia of trying to cover up the cause of a plane crash that killed 38 people. He claimed the Azerbaijan Airlines jet was accidentally shot at over Russian territory near Grozny and that electronic warfare systems interfered with the plane's control. Aliyev called on Moscow to admit its responsibility, rejecting theories suggesting otherwise. Hackers, including the pro-Russian group No Name 57, launched DDoS attacks on around 10 Italian websites, including the Foreign Ministry and Milan airports. This has resulted in the temporary disruption of services. Italy's cybersecurity agency swiftly mitigated the impact within 2 hours. Airport operations remained unaffected, while No Name 57 claimed responsibility, citing retaliation against Italy's alleged Russophobia. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko pardoned 20 individuals convicted of extremist-related crimes. This included 11 women and several with chronic illnesses or children. The Interior Ministry will oversee their conduct post-release. Lukashenko, citing humanitarian reasons, previously pardoned over 30 similar offenders in November, dismissing suggestions of seeking improved relations with the West. Austria announced plans to purchase 12 Italian-made M346 FA fighter jets from Leonardo to replace its decommissioned SAAB 105 planes. The Austrian Defence Ministry confirmed ongoing contract negotiations with a letter of intent signed on Saturday. Chancellor Karl Nehammer highlighted the deal as a testament to strong Austria-Italy cooperation. According to the Krone newspaper, the final cost of the purchase is yet to be determined, but approximately $1.04 billion has been allocated for it. NATO announced plans to bolster its presence in the Baltic Sea following suspected sabotage of undersea power and internet cables. Estonia launched a naval operation to guard Estlink 2, while Finland detained a Russian oil ship over the outage. Finnish President Stubb urged stronger NATO support, with General Secretary Mark Rutte confirming enhanced military presence. Sweden's Coast Guard has also intensified ship traffic surveillance, utilising aircraft and vessels. Croatian President Zoran Milanovic, known for his anti-EU stance, is expected to win the first round of Sunday's presidential election. At a recent rally, he criticised Prime Minister Andrej Plenković for corruption and pro-EU policies. Milanovic leads the polls with 39% of support, followed by Dragan Primorac, the candidate for the ruling National Conservative Croatian Democratic Community, with 23%. That's all we have time for. We'll be back soon with more of the latest news updates from across the world.